Hey everyone, welcome back to the Psychedelic Entrepreneur. I have here Courtney. Hey Kat, how are you? Good to be here.
Good to be here, Beth. Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Yes, so good to connect and get to know you better and share your experiences with our audience. So if you guys don't know about Kat, I have been hearing about Kat for years and years and years. She is known as the afterlife coach, at least to me. Kat is a traditionally trained ayahuasquero and a Huachumera, which I had actually never heard of that word, but that makes sense. With 16 years experience, with 16 years plant medicine experience, she's also a psychedelic integration coach and death doula, one of my favorite subjects to talk about. Kat pours medicine in places like Peru and Costa Rica many times a year. She leads master plant dietas, both in person and remote, and assists with preparation and integration of psychedelics and major life events through her role as a spiritual life coach. She's an expert at guiding people through the shadow work that emerges from patterns of destruction and darkness and the path of understanding and embracing death. Oh, Kat, these are some of my favorite subjects to talk about. So yeah, I've actually known about your work for a pretty long time. I'll never forget, it was one of my friends who, you know, I don't like to say I introduce people to medicine because I do believe that the medicine comes to people as they're ready. But she went and sat with the person who I sat with and was blown away and life changed. And then, I think it was like a month or two later, I heard she had booked sessions with you. And I was like, and this was years ago. And I was like, wow, awesome. I'm so glad you found someone. And she said great things. And then I think she went and did a rose dieta with you. So that's how I heard about you over the years and have been following your work. So I would love to know, and I'm sure the audience as well, what brought you on this path of the medicine and then turning it into this whole career? And you, to me, are one of the early pioneers of integration coaching. I would say you're one of the first, at least that I've heard about, at least who've made it a statement. But yeah, let's hear about your path and what took you to where you are today.
Sure. I mean, what brought me to the medicine is the same thing that I think brings everyone is I needed healing. And back then it was the jungle or nothing. This is like almost 20 years ago. So the guy I was dating said the word ayahuasca and said, "Do you want to go to the jungle?" And I was in. I had no idea what I was getting into. Nobody had heard of it then. But I needed help with bulimia and being a functional alcoholic. I was diagnosed bipolar. I was like a mess, but a pretty typical mess. And
Mm.
didn't really think that ayahuasca was going to help, figured it would be more of an adventure. And it turned out that my experience there gave me a taste of what was possible, that I too could heal, basically. And it's a lot of work, as you know. It continues to be work. It's not like I'm fixed or healed or any such nonsense. But I feel like now I have the foundation and the tools and the excitement and the motivation and the balance and all of those things to live my dream life. So that's what got me involved in first ayahuasca and then later wachuma, mushrooms, like lots of the medicines. But as far as the coaching, I started apprenticing as an ayahuasca shaman like 13 years ago. And I was just very naturally helping people prepare and integrate. Integration wasn't a word, it wasn't a thing. And I finally just one day was like, this is what I want to do with my life. I've got to charge money because I'm doing it so much. I need an energy exchange. So I'll just like create this job and see what happens. And I never in a million years did I think it would be the next like hot job, because it was not heard of really that I was aware of when I started doing it.
Next, I know, I love it. Next hot job. I
Who
love
knew?
to, I know. And I always love to make fun of myself and this whole, I don't even know what to call it. I keep saying the word industry, but then it kind of makes me a little skeevy like a lot of people. But the reality is, and I know this from this same experience, it becomes very jarring when you step onto this path and you don't have the right level of support. And I remember many, many years ago, I was working with a therapist who had never even heard of it, had never tried psychedelics, and I tried to explain it. I remember spending like a year explaining all this to her, and I was like, maybe it's time I find someone who gets it. And that's when things really started to shift. And that's when I realized like this word integration was real. You know, it wasn't just a thing you kind of hear about the, you know, the morning after, let's do a little integration circle. It's a real thing. So I'm curious, along the way, you were helping the people you were working with. Just because I know there's a lot of people listening who want to be integration coaches or who already are, or who might be on this path who, you know, maybe think they don't need integration, but what was it that you started noticing, you know, with the patterns with people where they weren't really like, I used to say like, you keep drinking all this medicine and then nothing's changing.
Mm-hmm. That's a big one, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ayahuasca, to me, she calls that doing your homework on the teacher's desk, is when you keep going to a ceremony experience, but you're not doing the homework in between, the integration. Honestly, what happens in those cases, and I still see it a lot, is that the ceremonies get more and more difficult, because these whispers have to become screams. And if you're not actually doing the work, as we call it, then, you know, Mama Medicine's got to bop you upside the head and say, wake up. This is not about using. A lot of people use these substances kind of like we want pharmaceuticals to be, which is a quick fix, make it go away. And as you know, it don't work that way. And so integration is not just like for integrating the difficult experiences, which absolutely that too, but it's about like really becoming conscious of the things that we need to shift on a daily basis in order to make our lives look the way we want them to. You know, we get all these beautiful insights when we're in these altered states. If we don't embody them and bring them into our daily lives, they're like memories rather than life-changing experiences.
Yeah, and I love what you mentioned, that the ceremonies get harder, the experiences get tougher. I've made fun of myself where I'm like, you know, ayahuasca reminded me of that probably like 50 times before I finally listened after 3 years. You know, it's like, how many times do you just need to hear that same message till it really gets through? You know, I was always like, oh, well, maybe it's not real. I would just tell myself like, maybe that's not actually the truth coming through. But it sometimes takes that being to finally wake you up and put you onto that path. I'm curious, you know, with your own path, where were the shifts with you? Like, okay, you went down to do medicine down in, I'm assuming, South America, because back then, you know, that was all there was. What happened? Were you just totally blown away and shifted, or did you get the call and next thing you know, you're like dedicating your life to this? And I'm curious what you were doing before that. Like, did you have a career in fashion and a corporate office? You know, like,
almost. I had a career in video game production, and I was making the first massively multiplayer game with sex. And that was one of the first things that Aya addressed is this what you came for, darling, really? And I had to admit that no, although it was blowing up, and I had to walk away from that because it was very clearly not what I came to do, you know, and I had conflict with that. So that was one of the first big wake up calls around basically what she showed me is that the life I had was lovely, but it wasn't a life that I actually wanted. I had been taking what was given to me rather than being proactive about manifesting what I wanted, which is very common. And I was miserable as a result. So my first step was just to get honest with myself. That was really where she helped me the most to begin with, and to start making changes and shifts. But it by no means was like a light switch. You know, it was quite a dance of resisting the level of which I was out of integrity with my life, because I basically had to change everything. And that was very overwhelming. And not everyone has that situation when they go to the medicine. Most people have a lot more awareness of who they are, I'll be honest, than I did. So that's the good news. But it was a process of even owning the calling of wanting to do this work. Because I'm a white girl from Montana, right? What do I know about indigenous teachings and lineages? But the calling was there from the beginning of just being madly in love with this medicine, and the process and the darkness and the messiness and all of it. It took 2.5 years of building up my self-worth before I would even admit that I wanted it, because it was so scary to even say, could I be a shamanic practitioner. And then as soon as I started working with that intentionally, the synchronicity started happening. I started meeting the right people. I found a teacher in the States. Like, it just started rolling from there. But I had to get courageous enough to say, I want it, and at least think there was a possibility that I deserved it, that I could do it.
Yeah. And you just said so many gems that I hear about. I mean, this is what inspired me to go from just a business coach to a business coach helping people on this path, because I went through this as well. And, I've been working with medicines since I was quite young, since 14, and I'm in my 40s now. And I was living that lie as well. And like I wasn't diagnosed as bipolar, but I definitely had very destructive behaviors, was headed down that path of just like constant depression, anxiety, excessive drinking, excessive everything else. And I took myself out of it. It was one of these points where I was actually getting sick. I was on kind of this deathbed where I realized like life needs to change. And so I have witnessed people for so many years on this path of, drinking medicine or working with mushrooms or just keep going back to medicine, hoping that it's that magic pill that just changes. And then nothing in their life changes and they don't make those moves. And a lot of it comes back to career misalignment where they're like, actually, everything is fine. I'm making great money. I have a decent job, but it's sucking my soul out of me. And it's not really who I authentically am. And it's more that surviving versus thriving. So that's when I started to realize, especially people on this path, it's like they keep going back looking for the same answers over and over and over, but not making that change, because that change is very hard. I mean, I constantly write about the parallels between stepping into your, soul's purpose or whatever you want to call it, just your authenticity, and how similar it actually is to working with medicine itself. It's like the ups and the downs and the self-doubts and like you said, like years to even get your self-esteem and your confidence to that place of making a change. Mm-hmm. And it's definitely, it doesn't even matter what it is. It's one of the hardest journeys, but it's one of the most fulfilling journeys there is. And this is where I was like, you know what? I'm sure if I went through this, there must be at least 10 other people on this planet who are on this path who need help making this big change, especially in their career, from like comfort to this discomfort, but it pays off, right? So then I'm curious, how did you get into things like death doula, death coaching? This has actually been a passion of mine I've been speaking about for years. And I finally actually have a few clients right now who are on that death doula, death coaching path. But I've seen this as a much needed area, for now and in the future where, this conversation around death needs to change in our society. But I'm curious, like, what brought you to that?
The friendship with death has been in my field since birth. So I was born very sick and lived in an oxygen tent for the first couple of years of my life. And I have a tangible memory of knowing that I could just go to sleep and wake up at home. But my mother's face on the other side of the oxygen tent is what kept me tethered, because she looked so scared and worried. And I remember thinking, I don't want to break her heart, so I'll stay. And so that relationship was embedded in me. And honestly, to the point where my work with ayahuasca is more about falling in love with life rather than unraveling a fear of death, and that's not that uncommon either. Some of us don't like it here because we know innately there's more to consciousness than just earth school. But so the relationship with death has been near and dear to me. I used to volunteer in hospice. I used to do a lot of work in that regard, and then finally decided I want to get certified, because my hope is, with the way that things are progressing in the medicine world, in the not so distant future, it will be an alternative for people to say, I would like to have medicine as a ceremony towards the end of my journey. And that would be the culmination of my two biggest passions of embracing death and working with medicine. Right? Like, I can feel you.
I know. I'm about to cry. Because I've lost my father and my stepfather, and actually just yesterday, my partner's ex-girlfriend died at a very young age, and it was coming, but it was, it was very young. So yes, this is what I've been seeing for many years. When I interviewed Paul Stamets on my summit last year, he spoke about this very same thing, and about this right to die with dignity, with ceremony, with ease, with less fear, because our society is so bound up in this fear, especially with the last year and a half on our radar with death all around us. And I'm like, well, wait a second. What if we could all see this differently? So I am so supportive of that vision of yours. And I have so many prayers. I constantly talk about, by the time I die, I pray that there's a place where I can, almost like a dieta. Like I actually have had this vision of, I want to go to a place that's nice and beautiful, lots of peace. I can invite a couple loved ones, and then I get to ceremonialize my way out of there. Like that would just be amazing. But wow,
we have the same vision. We're creating that place for all of us that want to transition in that way, and not in a hospital on life support or any of that craziness. Yeah.
My father, it was interesting. He was a scientist. And he made it clear when we were very young that he never wanted to be kept alive. Like he just said, if I'm ever sick, just let me die. Like he just was a big proponent. And so this was drilled into my head from a really young age that he just wanted to die naturally. And then of course he got cancer, and that time came, and we had to make these decisions where it was like, okay, he was hooked up to some tubes. They were trying to help him. And I'm telling you, I spent one night in the hospital with him, and I woke up in the middle of the night and he was like ripping off his IVs. Like he just didn't want to be in there. And I understood it. He used to say, take me out to the desert and throw me to the wolves with a bottle of bourbon. Like that was like his way out. So witnessing that, I was like, there has to be a different way, So I'm so glad you're working on this, because I feel like this is the next frontier of the medicine work. And I mean, this is one of many, but I know this is a big one that to me needs to happen. So I'm so glad you're talking about that. And this conversation, it just touches my heart, because it's still, I equate it as like, it's one of these taboo subjects. It's like up there with psychedelics, where many years I was afraid to talk about it. This is my own argument with ayahuasca for years, was her telling me to start speaking about this more. And I was like, no, I don't even, some of my friends didn't even know I did this. So it's really interesting, these taboo subjects that you're really into. So,
and they're not so taboo anymore, thankfully.
I know.
Yeah.
Getting there.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I want to hear a little bit more about your thoughts on, integration and what it really means, because this is becoming more of a buzzword. I just released my own podcast on how to grow your integration coaching business. And my theory, because I've seen this now with a bunch of clients, is that a lot of people who work with psychedelics don't actually think they need integration help. What are your thoughts on integration where we are now and the future of where things are heading, especially with the growth and the explosion and the psychedelic renaissance and the mainstream media and availability? How do you think integration will play a part?
So I think that prevalent perspective of, I don't need integration, it's really only for the very hard experiences. It's a very Western psychosis perspective, because it indicates, I got it. I can do it all myself. And I don't think that's really true for any of us, because we are supposed to be tribal. We're supposed to be connected and to lean on each other for assistance in this whole process of healing or expanding consciousness or whatever is bringing you to the medicine. So my perspective is, if you have the calling and the resources to sit with medicine, you should also make integration equally important. Because otherwise it's kind of like a writer saying, I don't need an editor, I got it all. And maybe some people are somewhat good at that, but there's always a benefit of having an outside perspective that's supportive, that understands the process. Always, because it allows you to get the most out of the experience. Because this is hard work, right? We spend a lot of time and effort preparing, going through the ceremonies. To not have support on the back end is sort of disrespectful to the whole process. because you're just not going to get as much out of it as possible. I have integration help. I have a tribe. Just because I do this for somebody else it doesn't make it that I'm expert at doing it for myself. There's no such thing.
Yeah, I keep saying I do not understand how anyone is alive in 2021 without help around them, without support. I have I'm like you. I'm like, I have a team of people. You know, I work with a somatic therapist who is very much on the medicine path herself and understands every bit of what I'm going through. So it's, you know, it works together. I have, you know, a team of healers. I have another coach. I can go on and on. You know, it's just been interesting to watch, especially from this vantage point of being out there in this world, the amount of people, you know, the Michael Pollan book, the amount of people that are like, oh, this is my answer. Let me magic pill this, or I call it the Amazon Prime effect, you know, where they just like, oh, maybe mushrooms will solve all my problems. And I'm just curious, you know, what does it take for people to finally go get this support? You know, for me, it took hitting this really crazy rock bottom after I think it was, I forget if it was my first or second dieta, but I came back and it was like, everything was just blown up in my face. And I was like, you know what? I think it's time for some like next level help. But yeah, like what is it that you've seen in the past? Is it that people do have this kind of like break or breakdown, or, you know, they finally have drank medicine 50 times and then decided to get help?
Typically, yes, it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, it was that way for me too. It took me 9 years before I had the mother of all breakdowns on the medicine. And of course, by then I was like, oh, I got this. I've been doing this for 9 years. I'm good. And then the humbling just pummeled me, right? Which is like the hubris of the ego thinking, oh, I understand this. But again, because I started it during the time when integration wasn't the thing, I give myself a little grace for the fact that it took a while before I got humbled to say, I not only need help, I deserve help. It's a better way to put it. I deserve it because it's a lot to understand the complexity of our psyches, the relationship of ego and soul, how medicine communicates, all of these things. No, we shouldn't do it by ourselves. So yeah, many of us wait for the breakdown in order to get the breakthrough of receiving help from our tribe. But the younger generations aren't so damn stubborn about this. You know, the younger generations kind of innately seem to understand more. Yeah, it takes a village for all of us to be healthy and happy and thriving. And so thankfully, it seems to be that is improving, that people aren't waiting for a massive breakdown in order to recognize, hey, maybe I need help integrating these huge experiences. Some people are having it out of the gate. And in fact, the retreats that I'm starting to do incorporate into the cost and integration assistance package. It's like, because you're going to need it no matter if it's lollipops and rainbows, right? Or if it's really difficult. Regardless, you know, we're starting to crack the code that it's a really integral part of the process.
That's so healthy. And that to me is the way, you know, you get the most benefits out of these really powerful experiences, especially if you go do something like a dieta or like a, you know, drink 5 times in 2 weeks kind of retreat of sorts, because these can be so life-changing. And I don't know about you, but I used to live in New York City, and I would go down to the middle of nowhere in Peru for 2 weeks and come back to literally New York City. And it was like no joke coming back to that environment with like the energies and the sensitivities. And, you know, it was like after a while, I'm like, well, wait a second. This, you know, like it's almost like you needed like an integration place. You needed the right environment. You need the right team. Because I would find, and I would see this around in the community of people I went with, that some of us would just go right back into, it'd be like you almost snap out of the dieta really quick, you know, and it just didn't, then it's like, what's the point?
Yeah, totally. I lived in LA, so same thing. I remember the second time I came back from a retreat, I saw a billboard for a strip club on the way home, and I just lost it and was crying and hysterical for multiple days because of that contrast of what we experience in the jungle and what we experience in this crazy world, the concrete jungle. I consider myself a pretty badass, strong, resilient person, but the medicine brings out that beautiful sensitivity in all of us. And I had no no idea how to deal with that. So you're right. Some of us need even a place to transition
Oh yeah.
and to create that balance and that ability to deal with the intensity that most of us are shut down from here until we
Mm.
go work with the medicines that say, hey, wake up, be present to what's going on in your world, which means that we got to feel it, we got to process it. And it's no joke.
No joke, especially these days with these energies that we have going on the earth. It's so fascinating and amazing to be alive right now.
Yes.
I'm curious, I know you host Dietas. Let's talk about this a little more. Explain to people, especially for people who've never heard of these or don't really understand the options of what a diet is and connecting with the plants on this manner. Can you explain what it is you offer and how it benefits people to do a dieta? I was just telling Kat, at the beginning, I just came off a rose dieta. Last year I did a cacao dieta. Of course, I've done the master plant dietas. But yeah, let's hear about this just in case people have never done one.
One of my favorite topics because it allows the diet process just allows for so much transformation with or without ayahuasca and other medicines. So what it is essentially the language that I use for it, it's a marriage between our spirit and the spirit of that plant for a period of time. And you can, people ask me sometimes, like, what's the difference between microdosing or working regularly with a plant and a diet? It is this container, this commitment to being all in. Consider microdosing or sitting with a cup of rose tea at the end of your work day, dating the plant. A diet is all in, right? You're going to merge. And the idea with it is that, you work with a plant that has a vibration that you are seeking to learn and understand. Dieting Rose, I did that a handful of years ago. I mean, she's a fascinating plant because she has that sweetness, that femininity and heart connectedness, but she has thorns. And so she teaches that protective, the energy of boundaries, that a lot of us need to learn. So each plant has this personality, these superpowers that we can learn from by doing the work of merging with them. And so the way that we do that is we follow, of course, a really strict food protocol. We disengage from dark media. We do all we can to essentially make it our full-time job to merge with the plant, to meditate, to drink the tea. Most plants, some plants are a bit toxic. So sometimes we just work with the sense of smell, just depending. But it's a chance to shift our focus and do internal work with the partnership of a plant spirit. And there's two different kinds of diets. There's the very traditional isolated, right, which you have done, which you go unplug from the world, go all in, and you have your shamanic guide. And typically that's done with ayahuasca. You at least open and close, sometimes work with her in the middle to strengthen the connection. But there's also something called a social diet or a dieta suave, a soft diet, which is kind of not appropriately named because it's not easy. It's not soft in an easy way. It just allows you to be in the world and handle your life, but also make time for this. Now, a social diet takes longer because it's not your full-time job. So typically we want to do at least a month in a social diet, whereas an isolated diet can be a couple of weeks maximum, and you can have massive experiences in that time. But each one has pros and cons. I actually think social diets are harder because you get to handle your life, you get to work with the plant. It's harder to have all of the dietary restrictions when you're in the world full of temptation, especially if you live with other people who are eating salt and sugar and whatever. But regardless, you learn how powerful you are. You learn how powerful plants are, how incredibly not only conscious these beings are, but how much they want to partner and help us. How excited they are to be a part of our evolution, because they know that we're the ones in charge of how the planet's going to be treated going forward. So they really like to do all they can to empower us to treat each other and her better than we're doing now, which we could use some improvement. So that's the purpose of it, is for healing and transformation and insight. And I love it because it works with or without ayahuasca. Some of us have a really great relationship with her, and so that's very beneficial. But for people that have physical or emotional issues that don't allow them to have that journey with Aya, they can still do a diet, because they're just as powerful, even when she's not involved.
So glad you're saying that, because I speak about this all the time. I'm like, it's not just these psychoactive plants that are here for us. There's so much power in every single plant around us if you want to learn how to connect with the spirit and communicate with it and really do this connection work. Because I mean, to me, I have had profound experiences with just a flower essence. I've had last summer, I had a pretty life-changing experience just by sitting next to a datura flower that I was growing in my garden and just praying. You know, like I just had a conversation and asked for something, and it was like, whoa, it was like a whole ceremony opened up. And that I didn't even touch, you know, there was no physical, ingestion of any sort. And it was all energetics. And of course, she's an extremely powerful plant, but
A little bit.
I'm curious. I have only met one person who's ever drank or sat with datura. Have you ever?
I've worked with Toei, her cousin from the
Yeah.
jungle.
Wow.
But I've only done what you've done with Datura, which is sit and converse, which is enough. I mean,
Yeah.
even that was seductive and powerful. And wow. Yeah, the nightshades, that class of plants, I mean, mad respect.
Yeah.
Drinking Toei was quite an experience. It's a
Um,
really very intensely dark, yet
wow.
profoundly beautiful plant. Datura, Toei, plants like that, they really show us our relationship with love, with our
Mm,
hearts, and
mm,
the seduction of the darkness. They are not plants we want to work with if we're still kind of unsure, how to really claim our own light and to know that it's not the universe that creates goodness, it's us, it's our
mm.
relationship to what's happening. So they are wonderful plants that test that kind of like, where are you at with your relationship with light and darkness?
My God, deep journey. I'm not sure. Maybe I could handle it.
I bet
It's
you
been
could.
it's been a very deep journey into the shadows the last few years. And in 2017, I had a dieta that finally pushed me to the ultimate edge of like all darkness. You know, it's like everything that you could possibly imagine happened. But by the end, I was like, oh, now I understand what a real light worker is. It's the navigation of like sitting in the dark and navigating it and not wanting to run. And I mean, this was like,
Uh-huh.
it was like a 6-month journey into this, though. It was very, it was definitely hard. It was like one of my deepest, darkest initiation years that I've ever gone through on every possible level that you can imagine. But, you know, life completely opened up since then. But I'm curious, what are some of your favorite plants to diet, you know, whether it's down in the jungle or a social diet?
So many, but
Yeah.
I would say the jungle plant that I recommend the most is Bobenzana.
She's my favorite.
Yeah, she exactly right, because she's like, I call her the cheerleader of the plant world. Like she's just got so much resilience. Like in the jungle, when the rains come and they flood her, you think, oh, she's decimated, and then out comes this little tendril of a leaf, and you feel the power of this plant to persevere, which we need that. But the thing that she has the most is that self-love
Mm.
piece. She has these big pink pom-pom flowers, as you know, and that's why I call her the cheerleader, is she's just like, love yourself. That's the answer.
Mm.
And we know this intellectually. All of us get this, but she has the medicine that can help us just dissolve the blockages to that and really experientially tap into our worthiness of unconditional love, which if more of us had that, we would
Mm.
not be fighting and decimating the planet and doing all of this insanity. So she's the big one in the jungle that is like, it's a beautiful plant to start with too, because she's easy on the body. She
Mm.
diminishes inflammation. She's got lots of medicine that the body loves too. Unlike working with a plant like mapacho, that's going
Mm.
to wring you from the inside out and is very intense. It is not for an entry level diet. Bovenzana is kind
Mm.
of like Rose. Rose is a beautiful one for us North Americans to work with because she's everywhere here. I also think sage is a really
Mm.
important plant to work with, especially for any of us called to being on this path for any particular role, because she teaches the art of energetic protection. And us Westerners are usually pretty naive about that, of like, oh, what is there to be protected from? Until you're confronted with the reality of the power of spirit energy. And Sage is my teacher of how to just kind of be sovereign and to keep my space protected so I don't have to learn in those incredibly difficult ways that I did in the beginning. So those are a few of the kind of more ubiquitous ones.
Wow. I had never thought of dieting sage, but I have a huge sage bush growing right out here outside my house. So
she might be calling you then.
I know that's an amazing idea because yes, I have, trust me, I've gone through those lessons of the energies where I didn't think it was possible and I didn't think it was real until it happened. I mean, I've had kind of some dark stuff where I was like, whoa, I didn't realize someone could really project all of that energy onto me that affects me for weeks, weeks and weeks and weeks. Yeah. So that's an interesting one. So I'm going to give that a try. And it's, again, it's interesting where I live, there's someone around near me who has been hosting plant dietas of all of our local plants around us, which I find I know it's so
Love
amazing.
That.
I'm like, yes, wait, you can just connect with the plant right outside. There's a reason why they're growing right outside. There's a reason why you're called to where you're living and, they're surrounding us. I am, the middle of COVID, my herbalist gave me a tincture. It had white pine in it, which helps with the lungs and it helps with inflammation. It helps with, immune support. I have like gigantic white pine that I stare at out my window like every day. And I was like, wait a second. I could just make my own, right? It's much healthier, so it's like, look around, every plant has a message and a spirit and we can all connect. And I do believe exactly what you said. They all have these messages for us, like the Bomansana, self-love, love of each other, love of the earth. And I think if we all start paying attention to this is the solution. I mean, I even say this to my clients that entrepreneurship, stepping onto your soul's journey, your path, like your authentic truth is the deepest self-love journey that there is. I mean, if you don't love, and it's not easy, it's, we've all been taught wrong. We're all, poisoned by everything we hear in society that's making us feel like not worthy enough or not good enough. But these plants just have that ultimate message. And I actually saw this on your Instagram. I'm like, that's so good. It's like, ayahuasca has the same message for you over and over and over. And it's true. It's always that same. And it's like, how many times do I need to remember the nature of reality is just love? And that's it.
As many as it takes.
I know. It's like, bam, bam. Okay. I always find it funny at integration circles when I'm like, well, it reminded me about love again, the same messages.
Weird how this keeps coming up. Yeah. But, to have compassion for this ego that we have, that the plants don't have, that creates that experience of separateness, which is why we have to keep coming back to unity, heart space of, love, because this thing is a powerful force that, dupes us into forgetting that that's the answer. But that's the game we came to play, isn't it?
I know, right? The internal battle. No, I'm curious, speaking of ego, because this actually came up on when I interviewed Charlotte and Dre from the Ancestor Project recently about everybody, and I'm generalizing here. It's like this feeling of like everybody is feeling called to the medicine. Everybody wants to facilitate. Everybody wants to be a trip sitter. And we were talking about this and I was like, well, I've been trying to take a very neutral path of who's to say what's right or wrong. Because, I know what works for me. It doesn't mean that, who am I to say that you can't go drink ayahuasca in a Brooklyn loft with, music playing over an iPhone? It's not what I want, but hey, it seems to work for others. What is your take on all this kind of, I don't even know what to call it because it's this weird world where there's people that are truly called and people who are truly helping and, facilitating more with mushrooms, less with ayahuasca, I would say. But then there's
happening.
Yeah. But then there's the person who goes and drinks once and they're like, I'm called to this path and I'm going to go order some ayahuasca online, which I don't even know how they do. and then they're pouring it in their living room to a bunch of their neighbors. What are your thoughts on this happening now and then where it might be heading? Like, and how do you approach this, like from this place of like proper facilitation versus not, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's so tricky because there is really no definition of proper facilitation. And I'm like you in that because I work with people, I want to be a champion for what is calling them. And I'm not here to be a negative ninny and be like, I mean, because when I took on the apprenticeship with the Shipibo, they're like, you realize 5% of people actually move through the whole 7 to 12 year process and become facilitators, which was a bit discouraging. I was like, okay, but I get it now. It's true, actually, that if you really take on the old school way of being, especially with ayahuasca, a carrier of her or of San Pedro Wachuma, it's a lot of work and it's incredibly confronting of this ego thing we're talking about. That said, I'm a champion for as many people that are called to this to step into it. But I'm also really protective of the fact that it's only going to take a few people coming from their egos that hurt or kill people that's going to take all of the progress we've made and bring us back to a place of vilification of the plants. Because it's not the plant's fault that we have immaturity and egoism that steps forth and creates a lack of safety for people doing this work. So that's the piece that I'm really protective of. I want everyone to follow their calling, but check yourself. If you haven't drank medicine, in an ayahuasca's case, hundreds of times, you have no business pouring for somebody yet. But to take on the task of being excited about getting to that place, because it's unbelievably rewarding. But if you've drank a few times in a yoga studio and you think you got it figured out, oh sweetie, you're going to get humbled, and I don't want somebody else to get hurt in your space because of that, and then have the whole world think ayahuasca is dangerous because people are ignorant. That's the big piece.
Yeah. And that's exactly my concern is, cause I myself, I'm one of these people where, I'm like, I've got it. Like I've done this, 1,000 times for so many years. And then once in a blue moon, I'll have a really scary, bad, the last time this happened was, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, where someone who I trusted was like, come drink with my guy. He's visiting from wherever, some other part of South America. I trusted her, but then I knew when I got there was so much about it that I was like, oh, I'm not sure. Like different medicine, different rules, like kind of weird ones, things that I just wasn't used to. And then I have only worked with someone who had live music. Like I've never been in a room with any electronics because they're actually just not allowed. And during the ceremony, a song came over an electronic speaker and I and that was only a minor part of it. But there I had a really bad experience. I actually felt like crap for about 3 weeks after. That's never happened before. And there were parts of it where I just didn't feel safe. And that was only me, 3 years ago, having had tons of experience and feeling extremely unsafe. And so that's where I also start to question, like, okay, who's to say what's right or wrong? But if there are things being done that are unsafe, and now, of course, we're hearing more and more about abuses of power, and then, like we all know that there's some dark sides and sexual trauma and re-traumatization and people not knowing how to hold that space. And it's been interesting to watch. And, I've asked a lot of people about this over the years, and it's, in the end, it's like we do have this responsibility if we're going to keep growing and holding this high enough for the healing potential, for the availability of the people. Because once there's a negative this or that hits the mainstream media, then what? It's like, then everything could be ruined. We've seen this. I've seen this happen with the 5-MeO, which is also kind of concerning because there is a lot of there is a lot of actual, like, serious danger in that as well.
Yes,
but
medicine.
Yeah, and it's kind of been interesting and shocking to me how many people are facilitating it now. Like all of a sudden.
Making it sound like not a big deal. Oh, it's just a half an hour. It's like, no, your entire worldview could turn upside down. It is the biggest of the big in terms of the experiences. So, that's why I'm protective really of the plants. because they don't have voices. So I feel like people like you and I that are the messengers for these beings, we're not here to rain on anybody's parade, but we're here to sound the alarm of a lack of respect and responsibility. And that balance, as you and I are both trying to figure out, is really difficult, but it's important to have these conversations and to gently call out, the people that we know that maybe aren't ready, because I don't want to shame anybody, but if you
Yeah.
haven't already had the balls to the wall, humbling experience and know the potency of your medicine that you are pouring for somebody else, do you want to have that when somebody is trusting you for their safety? Because it's going to happen. And if we aren't doing our own work, then we have no business for holding space, because a lot of these people want to step forth. They're enthusiastic, which I love, but they haven't done their own work of healing and having, like what you described, that relationship with the darkness to recognize how incredibly dicey this is. So I have a friend who says, I don't trust a shaman who isn't reluctant. And I love that
Mm.
expression,
Wow.
because the reluctancy indicates the humility of like, oh God, yes, I know how intense this responsibility is, how crazy the spirit world is, all of that. I don't feel a lot of reluctancy in some of the newer people stepping forth. And so that doesn't feel safe. They simply don't know what they're dealing with. And it isn't a safe container as a result of that. And it doesn't matter how much experience we have as sitters. We're so vulnerable when we
Yeah.
sit in somebody's space. We need it to be safe, period, which means it needs to be from someone who's experienced and who has learned what it is to create a safe container. It isn't like good intentions. I love the expression, the road to hell is paved by good intentions. It isn't like, well, I hope everything works out. No, the medicine will school you that
School
it's
you.
experience, it's knowledge, it's wisdom, and it's wisdom from indigenous lineages, not the Western wisdom, not the alkaloidal structure of the plant. That's not the wisdom we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so that takes training and it takes practice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm so glad you say this because it was interesting. I was in Mexico in March and I guess I knew this was going on. It just, I hadn't been there in a few years, and there were people advertising the toad, Bufo, with a sign on a door on the street with like a WhatsApp number. And I was like, oh my God. Like I've done it once 4 years ago, and it took me almost 2 years to integrate that, whatever it was, 10 minutes. I mean, it was no joke. No joke. And
Yep.
it's true. I'm like, why are people giving this out on the streets of Mexico? Like, call a WhatsApp number. I mean, this is not like a hit of acid at Burning Man. This is a very different experience. So I'm curious, do you have any suggestions for either resources or questions people can ask for the facilitator and even aspiring facilitators, like questions they can ask themselves? That's one thing where it's like, well, are you truly ready? Are you really, being honest with yourself? Are you being humble? Like, what are
Oh,
some of
yeah.
the
Yeah.
resources?
I love that. Okay, so for the first part, the questions of people that are going to sit, I actually wrote a blog post with all of the questions I ask the facilitator I'm going to sit with and trust. Everything from what is your experience with the medicine, what's in the medicine, with the ayahuasca brew, where do you get it, how many people are there to assist, what happens if things get crazy, that kind of stuff. So that from the perspective of somebody who wants to make sure they're in a safe container. Um, then I love what you brought in of people who want to facilitate, what to ask themselves. Well, first of all, do you have permission from the plant? Part of the Western disease is entitlement of, oh, because I want it, then I get to have it. No, no, no. There needs to be this is a relationship. So if you step forth and you want to work with mushrooms, they have to say yes too. How do we know they say yes? That becomes something really personal in our relationship with our own intuition. And if you don't know the answer is a big emphatic yes, it is not time to serve. Then you continue to humbly cultivate that relationship. So that's the number one question is, does the plant I want to want to work with me too? And the other way we can trust that that's a yes is our results. Magical things happen, synchronicities. We meet the right people. We find the right source for beautiful medicine. These things happen because it's aligned. When we force it and those things haven't happened yet, it's going to be a chaotic container because we're going to have to learn our lessons that way. So just to ask those questions of, does this feel aligned, or am I in any way forcing? And if I am forcing, what do I need to learn? What support do I need to have in order to get it so that it's aligned and graceful? It's not bad news. It just says, oh, there's something I need to learn here first before it's gung ho. So that's the approach that I take with people who want to facilitate.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good approach and a good suggestion. It's been hard to navigate even with me, where I do have some clients who facilitate some one-on-one sessions. They have actually had training, they've been on the path, but at the same time, it's like, where is it okay? And they're actually not, no one I work with is a facilitator. They're weaving it into their other healing modality. And it's, I trust that they have had the proper training. But it's interesting because it has come up so much where I've just gotten the random stranger that's like, I want to start a business as a trip sitter, or I want to start a business as a facilitator. And it's like, it's a lot deeper than that. It's not just get your hands on some mushrooms and give it to someone and hope for the best. So it exactly is this, the alignment and the relationship, like the depths of relationship. Because again, I have seen, and again, this is my own personal experience, I've been in situations with a facilitator who is, she wasn't trained. I don't know where she got this idea. Someone told me it was really a powerful, amazing experience. And I went and I was like, whoa, like this was such an off experience that it was actually very scary at one point, and things were not held right. And then it becomes almost like a trauma response. I was like, I'm not doing mushrooms with anyone for a long time,
Which is the opposite of what we want to happen.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Exactly. So these are really important questions, and I'm so glad you've written this blog post. We should actually link that in the show notes so everybody can see. Because I do believe that especially as these psychedelics keep growing and as the medicines just, decriminalization's happening, and then the interest in the media, and then of course the kind of media that like only talks about maybe the positives, or only talks about like how this is the cure for all of your problems, which we will see what happens after that grows. These are going to be more important, this education, this, really tapping into your own intuition and feeling like, does this feel right? Have I asked the right questions? Is this really from someone I trust? Can you even, now I've become so hypersensitive where you can just feel the difference in ego. Like it just becomes so obvious now, like even through like tiny little things. It's like, oh, there's just so much ego there. I don't want to be in that space. The reality is we all have egos, even my humble little shaman who barely speaks English definitely has an ego somewhere in there. I have yet to see it, but I know it's in there. But Kat, let's, final parting words. I'm curious, what do you see as the future of psychedelics? Like in the next 5 to 10 years, like where do you see this going, and how, what is your future and what are you working on, in this world? I hate to say industry.
Yes. World feels right. Yes.
World.
So the way that I envision this growth, which I never ever could have foreseen it to be on this scale, that ayahuasca, everybody and their grandma wants to do ayahuasca. How did this happen? I don't know, but I kind of love it, to be perfectly honest. We have growing pains as a result of it. That's okay. And the way that I envision this happening, though, is I'd like to see the Western and the indigenous worlds come together more in a space of balance and mutual respect. The Western world doesn't know it all when it comes to how to work with esoteric medicines. These aren't pharmaceuticals, these are conscious beings. So I would like to see that conversation be more open to the indigenous perspective, or we're going to get in trouble again, and not understand the reality of working with spirit, of working with the intangible realms, because it's very real, as you know. So I see that evolution happening where their wisdom, the indigenous wisdom, is welcome and appreciated. Like we get humbled more and realize, oh yeah, the intellectual space doesn't have all the answers. There's much more to know about healing. I see a lot more doctors and whatnot in the medical field realizing, oh, we know some things, we don't know a lot of things. And that's really exciting for us to be able to say, there's more to know in this regard, and to keep everybody safe, and to let this continue to grow. Let's let all wisdoms be welcome to the table to talk about how we continue to grow. And from a personal perspective, like for those of us that want healing, I mean, I just see more opportunities to have more tailor-made experiences for trauma, for the gay and lesbian community, for the BIPOC community, like to go and work through traumas that communities understand because it's shared, and to have safe places to do that, and to be more educated around which medicines are most beneficial for ancestral trauma versus addiction, all the different things that we work with. So it's just exciting to see all the potential growth, and of course the responsibility that comes with that. We've talked about that a lot today. For me personally, what I'm up to is I've got a book coming out either this month or next month called The Plant Medicine Mystery School, which is all about what we've been talking about, how to work with this plant world in a space of relationship, and from a place of humility, but empowerment at the same time. I love working with that juxtaposition. And I'm starting a company that answers this question of where do I go to do this work safely? But from a curated perspective, knowing that I have a unique perspective of being someone who works behind the altar, I'm starting to be more vocal about the handful of places in legal settings where we can do this work that myself and the people that I trust say thumbs up. So that, there's the sites that list them all, like TripAdvisor style, but that's dicey because even somebody that has a good review of it might not know that, hey, it's not actually normal to have recorded music that isn't actually a safe container. So I'm trying to answer, because that's the question I hear the most: where should I go? And I can't serve everybody. I'd love to, but I'm doing less and less of that work so that I can be the messenger and make sure that people stay safe. That's my big passion, and that we stay reverent to these beautiful, conscious beings.
I am so glad you're starting this company. Because even me, I get this question all the time, like, where can I go do this? And I'm like, I just I have boundaries around that, because I have the people I work with who thank God goddess that are like the best of the best of the best. Like, it's been years and years. But at the same time, I've recently been invited to a Facebook group that was just called like something like safe ayahuasca retreats. And I was like, who's saying they're safe? Is it, how do you know, like, I don't, and then, and again, we've all seen these websites, and then people don't know where to go. And then there's other Facebook groups where people are advertising. I've now actually gotten a literal advertisement to go do a dieta, like all these different. Yeah, or I mean, we could go on, and it's like, it's a wild west. And this is where I'm like, well, I guess it will sort itself out, or there's going to be someone out there like communicating, here are the best options, or here are the different options, here are the pros and cons, here are how things are done differently,
Exactly.
Like, the place I go has no luxuries whatsoever. You got to be comfortable with tarantulas sleeping 4 feet away from you.
Which not everybody is. Yes.
Like hot water. I'm like, running water, huh? Like, no, there's no running water. But, and then I hear about someone else who's like eating fruit and getting like hot water. I'm like, wow, cool. So
that sounds fancy.
It's all, it's all to each their own, but that's so beautiful. And I'm so glad you're writing a book. That is a huge, huge feat. I imagine maybe writing a book in 5 or 10 years, but congratulations.
It's decades in the making in some ways. So yes, it's a huge thing. It's also a huge thing to speak on behalf of these incredible beings that don't have voices. So it's a very unnerving, but very exciting process. So thank you for the support.
Can't wait to read it. Well, Kat, it was so good to have you here. We will link that blog post. We'll link, is your book, like, is there somewhere where we can link to your book, or even if it's not out yet? Great.
You got it. Yeah, the publishing company has a little teaser page up. So yes, thank you.
So good. It was so good to get to know you here. Thank you so much for being with us. And
thank you so much for having me. I love this conversation.
So good. And everybody join us next week when we have another episode on the Psychedelic Entrepreneur. And if you loved this, then please feel free to give us or Kat a good review. We need the support for the plants, for this medicine, for the healing of this earth during these really interesting times that we're alive. Thank you so much.